Hi, Dominic.
Hi.
Thank you for visiting us.
It's a great pleasure as always.
So, this interview is going about music.
Yeah.
And I think you are music. It's in your veins, I think.
Yeah.
So I want to know a little bit about the history, you as person, and what music, how important that is for you. Yeah. So my first question is, what is your first memory of a music piece? What impressed you? What is always something you think back of?
Yeah. Well, the one that springs to mind the most, of course, there will have been musical experiences before this, but is when I was 14, when I first played my first symphony. Before that, I played the violin from the age of 4, and I was in the church choir. So, music was just in our family. That's what we did as a family growing up. Whilst other families were going to football and going on expensive holidays and whatever, we went to concerts. That was our thing. And so music was more than just a sort of recreational thing. It was absolutely it was super important to us as a family. And then we would, after the concerts, we would sit, even as a very, very young child, we would sit and discuss that concert and the behavior of the musicians and the content of the music and the sound and the staging and the lights and everything. And that was not just classical, but also pop music, and from going back to the Drifters, old American quartets to the London Symphony Orchestra, to a West End show, to a local jazz club, and so we were sort of immersed in music. So that was really my upbringing, was in music, and that went alongside very nicely with my ability to be able to play music. But my parents were not musicians. Okay. So they just loved music. So it was just one of those things. It was sort of serendipitous that I became a musician. But at 14, I started playing the double bass. Okay. And I was invited into the school symphony orchestra. And there we played Shostakovich's 10th Symphony. Now, anybody that knows that symphony will go, oh yeah, well, if you don't know it, I highly recommend it.
I will.
It is one of those pieces which is really, for me, just everything just made sense. I was playing an instrument that I knew almost instantly would be my life. The violin never really worked for me. And I was playing the bass, and that just suddenly everything, the fact that I'm sat on a bass chair now feels very comfortable. I could sit here all day. And playing this unbelievable music that really got straight inside, really mattered to me, and still does. Every time I play it, it's still sort of a very regular occurrence that we play this piece. Yeah. And so that single piece of music changed the course of my life and my thoughts about symphonic music. My thoughts on all other types of music had already been very strongly formed by then. I had always been a big Stevie Wonder fan and a big Paul Simon fan, and Simon and Garfunkel and Neil Sedaka, and then the Drifters, and this sort of really super Oscar Peterson, these sort of wide variety of music, and all of that mattered. And of course, classical music had been a part of my life, very much so, but it became completely interwoven into my very existence at that point when playing that piece. And it was there's a wonderful a wonderful word in English called epiphany. It was an epiphanal moment. So suddenly everything went ding, and that was
light bulb
moment, exactly. Yeah. And I turned it into slightly more theatrical than that. But it was really, and I remember it today like it was yesterday. And I have got a terrible memory, so it must have really meant something.
Yeah, well, I can imagine. I had that for myself also. I'm not a musician, but of course at home there was always music on. my father loved music, my mother loved music, so from morning till evening there was music in our...
Was that on the radio or was that on records? Or was it...
Radio and records,
right.
Yeah, but
also,
they didn't play music, so I was grown up. So music was always there, but there was one moment I heard a music piece, and then I thought, wow, and that threw me really into the music. So I can imagine that. You were playing music, but there was a moment you decided I want to do this professionally. When did that start? What was that on that moment or later?
It's difficult to know. If I'm to be honest, I was really hopeless at everything else. So it kind of was just like, well, if I don't make this work, then what? So it wasn't like it was my life's ambition to be coming and end up coming speaking to you, and there was no plan as such. I was just incredibly bad at everything else. I've got no qualifications I have no schooling as such. I've got nothing to show for my schooling. So I don't have my maths exam, I don't have my English, I don't have science. But
also not in music?
The only exams I passed was music. So it sort of became like, this is a bit of a no-brainer. But when I was about 16, I remember that I thought, because my family are full of entrepreneurs, and I thought that I could probably go and do that. And I can remember speaking to my father about it and saying, I think I might want to go to business school. And he swore at me and said, am I allowed to swear? I'll say, are you fucking stupid? And it turns out that I was. He just sort of said, son, you're gifted, and deal with it. This is you. This is where I see you going, and at some point you will realize this. And the second I left school and went to conservatoire, so I'm 18, I went from a very small school where I was a big fish in a small pond to London in the Royal Academy of Music, where I was an incredibly small fish in a very big pond. And I thought, okay, if I'm going to make it, then I need to take myself more seriously, and that's exactly what I did. I stopped drinking. I started studying. I suddenly learnt what it was to be a professional, and I used the skills that my family had got as an entrepreneur in my own musical life, and realized very early on that this is a music business. The fact that we're speaking here today is part of that. The music business for me was never just performing. There's a huge amount of business.
And that is also a part you like, or is it something you think you need to do?
No. Because 99% of my musician friends have no interest in the business at all. I just happen to. I think it's also in my blood. So I like exploring. I like coming. The fact that I walked into this shop not so long ago, and I like connecting with people that I wouldn't normally connect with, as part of this enormous thing which we call the music business. I would definitely put you in the music business, and so that kind of, and the two going along together made my sort of journey in this business a lot more interesting. And of course, that included later on media work and things like that, which has sort of changed my role completely in the music business now. But then it was just getting gigs and nailing the gig and making sure. My teacher, my professor at the Royal Academy of Music said to me, it's very simple. You don't be late, turn up prepared, buy the tea or the coffee here or a tea there, buy the teas in the break, and don't smell. And I've stuck to those.
I think nasty smell.
So, it was really as simple as that. And I thought I could do that. That if it is as simple as that, I can do that. That's not a problem for me. And as a result, I'm never late. I'd like to think that I'm generous. I'd like to think that I'm prepared, and I'd like to think that I don't smell bad.
We sit close enough.
Yeah. So that was it. And of course there's a financial benefit from doing those things. What it meant is that I could put food on the table. We had children very young. I had children at 24.
Okay.
So I had to sort my shit out really early. And so I was always attracted to work that was able to pay. I took very few risks. I still take very few risks. I only deal with people that I immediately trust. And I'm a handshake guy. I look people in the face. If I think I can trust them, then that's it. And if I don't, I just gently, in a very English, charming way, walk away.
Yeah.
And really, I've just stuck to that. And so it's not rocket science. And what I found is that I then connect with people who are very similar to me. They're all slightly weird. They've all got these slightly. So my wife always says, "No, your people you like, they're all sort of slightly." And I'm like, yeah, that's right.
Maybe it's because you love music. I don't know.
Maybe.
That's what I see also with
Right.
customers.
Exactly.
They have we have one thing common, and that's music.
Yeah.
But you also see, like myself. Yeah, you have some habits.
Yeah.
Let's put it like that.
Yeah.
And but that's also nice because if everyone is the same and very straight, that is a little bit boring. And if you have people with habits, then it's much nicer.
Yeah. There it is. I mean, that's sort of just the way I've sort of floated around this business, and I've been at it now for 35 years. So it's I joined the union. When I was 16, so it's actually a little bit more than 35 years. So there it is. I mean, it's.
What? We're talking about music, and I spoke with some musicians, and we met a few times, and what I've learned is that you like different styles of music, what you just told. You play also a different type of music. But what I've heard is that people who are classical educated will never become a very good jazz musician, and vice versa. What do you think about that?
There are exceptions. There are absolutely no. I'm not one. I'm absolutely not one. But you've got people like Andre Previn. This amazing jazz pianist and also conductor and composer. Leonard Bernstein, of course, was the sort of. There are people who are just on a different musical level that are able to swing between the two. Great jazz pianists like Keith Jarrett, for instance, who's really seen as a god in the jazz world. A very specific type of music, but. His live concerts in Cologne, for instance, are seen as the absolute, cornerstone of jazz piano playing. He also has made many classical records, organ, I think harpsichord also. So there are the crossover, but essentially, I think what stops most people is the business itself. As a jazzer, you have to go and play in a bar for no money all night. 5 nights a week, to develop your skills. Whereas as a classical musician, I can go and I'm playing in a concert hall 5 nights a week, and I'm playing written down music, and that's developing a different muscle, a different musical skill. And so there are many who try and do both. I mean, I can hold a jazz chart, but I don't consider myself a jazz musician because I know enough of them to know that I'm not on their level. But I employ a lot of them to bring them over to my side, and they allow me to go to their side. And in the middle of all of that, you have a bunch of musicians playing music which is classical jazz, if you like, light classical, light jazz. And that I find in my theatre shows, for instance, very attractive, where you've got absolutely blind. So, for instance, Sting is a great example of somebody who has gone into the classical world. He did all of his lute Renaissance music. He's always employed top jazz musicians, not pop musicians, jazz musicians, Vinnie Colaiuta and I mean, just unbelievable musicians around, and brings them all together, and they create this sound, which is Sting. And I'm not comparing myself with Sting at all, but I try to do the same thing in my own little way, that we create something which is kind of unique, and that's my That's how I step into the jazz world. But it's super important that jazz musicians will always credit classical music. I mean, especially pianists. They've all studied Bach. They've all studied Mozart, Beethoven. If they haven't, they've missed out. The great ones. Quincy Jones studied with great composing teachers in Paris. I mean, it's super mixed up when you really dig deep into the professions. But the fact is the end of our lives, jazz musicians play a lot more than classical musicians. They tend not to practice as much, they tend to perform more because their gigs go on for 6 hours and it includes a meal and a beer and whatever and no money. Whereas we're in and much smaller audiences in general, and we tend to go out for much bigger audiences for a specific amount of time, and it's a lot more sort of focused. Yeah. And so then different muscles are used.
Yeah, so what with muscles you mean they are used to have some freestyle. They can play around the notes, and I think a classical musician have not that freedom. Is that what you say?
That's yes, but their freedom is used in how to turn a phrase. As opposed to what notes to play. It's not all about the notes, it's how to turn the phrase, the dynamics, the sound, the colour. Not that jazz musicians don't do that, but my interest is always when you mix the two and you find the two, that basically they're the same thing. They're just trying to create a sound which is touching people in a way that words and painting cannot.
Well, it's interesting because I had written down also another question, and that is something you touch right now, is that if you have classical pieces, it's written on paper, you have the notes, you have everything.
Sure.
Though you can find many different interpretations.
Yeah.
And that is for me a little bit of strange because I'm not a musician, so for me it's a little bit difficult to understand how it can be that if something is written down, how it should be, that you can find on different streaming or CDs or LPs a different, how do you say it?
Interpretations.
Interpretations, yes. So for me, is why? Why is that happening?
Well, and this is a very good question, one that is very difficult to answer. So forgive me, I'll try my hardest. If you have a poem that's been written, a very simple poem, and if I was to say it, or you were to say it, it would be slightly different.
Yeah, but there are no notes.
Right, but there are words.
Yeah.
So we're following a score as such.
Yeah.
Now, if we then extend that out to, I'll take orchestra for instance, that in a Brahms symphony, Brahms First Symphony, if you go onto any of the streaming services, you can find 500 at least incredibly high quality versions of Brahms. I mean, I must have recorded them 20 times in my lifetime, so God only knows how many exist. And what you then have is not just one single word, but you have that times however many players there are, how many instruments are written for, and then within each group you then have violins who you've got 16 first violins, all of whom are playing it slightly differently. Yes. Then all the second, you've got an orchestra of 85 people, 85 different interpretations of one word. And so basically the conductor then comes in and tries to somehow move that huge sort of force around in a way that suits him and the musicians and feels good and sounds good. It's incredibly intricate, and you cannot put a mark on it and say that is the correct way to do it.
So it's also a little bit of freestyle.
It's absolutely freestyle, and it's just the notes that are not different. No. But if I was to say, can you clap loudly? What you may consider loud, that could start at here and could end here. It's all loud. So then, which one is loud? Now, if I were to say clap 500 times loudly, it's impossible for you to clap loudly 500 times exactly the same, which is the difference between humans and computer. And then you'll start making music. Suddenly you're clapping and it becomes music. It's all loud, but what you consider loud and what I consider loud is two different things, and what the audience considers loud is two different things. So we will never be the same, and that's the difference between live music playing and computer music playing. Of course, the big question at the moment is AI and what's this doing, and eventually that will be the difference. Is it a human being doing it, or is it AI doing it? And it won't take an expert to hear the difference. You'll feel the difference. And you already can, but AI is only just starting. But the reality is that music, there has to be some kind of human element. And with classical,
emotion. It's the emotion.
Right.
But it's funny that you're talking about is because I consider that the same with audio,
Sure.
because you have many developers of audio equipment,
sure.
and they have their own interpretation how
Absolutely
something is sounding.
Yeah.
That's why you cannot sell only one loudspeaker or one amplifier, because it's a taste. Your taste is maybe different than mine, so you choose maybe another audio system than I will do. So that's a little bit.
But I think what's even more familiar is that the great, as far as I am aware, the great audio makers would never suggest you can only use this amplifier with this speaker and this streamer, and that is the best. They can't say that. It's not possible. They could recommend it, but in actual fact, I might. So, for instance, the system that you set up for me is different components which you have thought, well, because I'm not knowledgeable enough, would suit my tastes. Well, that's music. That's exactly the same. There's no difference.
I always compare it like a cook. If you go to a restaurant, if you want something to eat, your taste can be different than mine.
Sure.
So someone likes spicy food, the other one wants sweet or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting. So you are composing music, and you are playing music.
Yeah, I don't compose very much. I have to make sure that we're correct. I arrange. So I take what other people have written, and I arrange it or orchestrate it for the situation that I want to use it for.
Okay.
So whereas, do I come up with fresh ideas, melodies and harmonies? No. I take an idea that already exists and put flowers on it for my own taste.
So, but for me, I want to know, what do you like more? Is studying for, like, say, the 20th time you are playing the First Symphony of Bach, or arranging? What is your heart?
Yeah,
What?
It's a great question. There's Bach didn't write any symphonies, but it doesn't matter. They didn't exist then, in all fairness. But I know exactly the First Symphony of Beethoven, which is not actually that good, by the way.
No.
Or Mozart, which I've never played. Interesting. It's the later ones that are good. But anyway, so let's take Beethoven 5, for instance. Which every classical musician in the world has played dozens and dozens and dozens of times. What happens to me is that if I'm playing something again and again and again, I start to sort of be overwhelmed by its genius. That sort of, how is it possible that Beethoven was able to wake up one day and write da 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 da, and the whole world recognizes it? He was living in Vienna, he was deaf. How is that even possible? Or has appeared in every genre of music and will continue to do so, not just in the ones that we know, but the ones that are going in 100 years after we're dead, there will be another genre of music, or 5 or whatever, we hope. That's how music develops, and they will use that melody. There's only 12 notes. So and it starts in the double basses, by the way. So the whole world heard that on the double bass, which is because he was friends with a double bass player. But anyway, that's another story. And I sit back and I think, this is incredible, and I'm just massively privileged to be able to play this music. If I was a composer, I would be trying to think up new melodies, but as an arranger, which I do, but only for my own purposes. I don't do it for anybody else. I'm looking at that melody and I'm thinking, well, how can I make that satisfying for me? So I'll put a chord underneath that I like, and that could be seen as a form of composing, but it's not really. Composing is something completely new. And so, to be honest, I enjoy playing that much more because it gives me time to appreciate what's going on. You know, oboe here and a cello coming in there, and then the timpani comes in there, and my God, and the conductor's doing that with it. That's amazing. That's turned that phrase. So that's going on in my head. Whereas if I'm arranging, I'm like, that sounds shit. That sounds even shitter. That sounds okay. Ugh, you know, and then I have to go back to it. I'm just not good enough. I've just not been given that skill set. So I have to work it really, really, really hard in order to be able to...
How come? Because you
I don't know.
You play so much music. Yeah, I can imagine
you would think
yeah.
it would go in, right?
Yeah.
But I could say the same to you. You're listening to music all day long, and if I were to put a guitar in your hand, maybe you could make a noise. Maybe after a few days you could turn a few chords over, but you're never going to be, Santana. I mean, it's just not there. And so, as I get older, I'm more and more aware of what I am good at and what I'm not good at. That becomes really obvious. And so I leave the stuff that I'm not good at to people that are, and bring them in and have them sat next to me. And so I've spent my whole career basically surrounded by amazing people who are able to sort of put together my kind of stupid ideas and make them into something which I consider to be worthy of putting on a stage, and as a result people buy tickets to come and see it. It's quite simple.